Oxherding Pictures with commentary and verses. Among the various formulations of the levels of realization in Zen, none is more widely known than the Oxherding Pictures, a sequence of 10 illustrations annotated with comments in prose and verse. It is probably because of the sacred nature of the ox in ancient India that this animal came to be used to symbolize primordial nature or Buddha mind. The original drawings and the commentary that accompanies them are both attributed to Kuo-an Shih-yuan, a Chinese Zen master of the 12th century, but he was not the first to illustrate the developing stages of Zen realization through pictures. Earlier versions of 5 and 8 pictures exist in which the ox becomes progressively whiter, the last painting being a circle. This implied that the realization of oneness, that is, the effacement of every conception of self and other, was the ultimate goal of Zen. But Kuo-an, feeling this to be incomplete, added 2 more pictures beyond the circle to make it clear that the Zen person of the highest spiritual development lives in the mundane world of form and diversity and mingles with the utmost freedom among ordinary people, inspiring them with his or her compassion and radiance to walk in the way of the Buddha. It is this version, presented here, that has gained the widest acceptance in Japan, and has proved itself over the years to be a source of instruction and unfailing inspiration to Zen students. Seeking the ox. The ox has never really gone astray, so why search for it? Having turned his back on his true nature, the man cannot see it. Because of his defilements he has lost sight of the ox. Suddenly he finds himself confronted by a maze of crisscrossing roads. Greed for worldly gain and dread of loss spring up like searing flames, ideas of right and wrong dart out like daggers. Desolate through forests and fearful in jungles, he is seeking an ox which he does not find. Up and down dark, nameless, wide-flowing rivers. In deep mountain thickets he treads many bypaths. Bone-tired, heart-weary, he carries on his search for this something which he yet cannot find. At evening he hears cicadas chirping in the trees. Finding the tracks. Through the sutras and teachings he discerns the tracks of the ox. He has been informed that just as different-shaped, golden vessels are all basically of the same gold, so each and everything is a manifestation of the self. But he is unable to distinguish good from evil, truth from falsity. He has not actually entered the gate, but he sees in a tentative way the tracks of the ox. Innumerable footprints has he seen. In the forest and along the water's edge. Over yonder does he see the trampled grass. Even the deepest gorges of the topmost mountains can't hide this ox's nose which reaches right to heaven. First glimpse of the ox. If he will but listen intently to everyday sounds, he will come to realization and at that instant see the very source. These 6 senses are no different from this true source. In every activity the source is manifestly present. It is analogous to the salt in water or the binder in paint. When the inner vision is properly focused, one comes to realize that that which is seen is identical with the true source. A nightingale warbles on a twig. The sun shines on undulating willows. There stands the ox, where could it hide? That splendid head, those stately horns. What artist could portray them? Catching the ox. Today he encountered the ox, which had long been cavorting in the wild fields, and actually grasped it. For so long a time has it reveled in these surroundings that breaking it of its old habits is not easy. It continues to yearn for sweet-scented grasses, it is still stubborn and unbridled. If he would tame it completely, the man must use his whip. He must tightly grasp the rope and not let it go, for the ox still has unhealthy tendencies. Now it charges up to the highlands, now it loiters in a misty ravine. Taming the ox. With the rising of one thought another and another are born. Enlightenment brings the realization that such thoughts are not unreal since even they arise from our true nature. It is only because delusion still remains that they are imagined to be unreal. This state of delusion does not originate in the objective world but in our own minds. He must hold the nose rope tight and not allow the ox to roam, lest off to muddy haunts it should stray. Properly tended, it becomes clean and gentle. Untethered, it willingly follows its master. Riding the ox home. The struggle is over, gain and loss no longer affect him. He hums the rustic tune of the woodsman and plays the simple songs of the village children. Astride the ox's back, he gazes serenely at the clouds above. His head does not turn in the direction of temptations. Try though one may to upset him, he remains undisturbed. Riding free as air he buoyantly comes home. Through evening mists in wide straw hat and cape. Wherever he may go he creates a fresh breeze, while in his heart profound tranquility prevails. This ox requires not a blade of grass. Ox forgotten, self alone. In the Dharma there is no two-ness. The ox is his primal nature. This he has now recognized. A trap is no longer needed when a rabbit has been caught. A net becomes useless when a fish has been snared. Like gold which has been separated from dross, like the moon which has broken through the clouds, one ray of luminous light shines eternally. Only on the ox was he able to come home. But lo, the ox is now vanished, and alone and serene sits the man. The red sun rides high in the sky as he dreams unplacidly. Yonder beneath the thatched roof, his idle whip and idle rope are lying. Both ox and self forgotten. All delusive feelings have perished and ideas of holiness too have vanished. He lingers not in the state of I am a Buddha, and he passes quickly on through the stage of and now I have purged myself of the proud feeling I am not Buddha. Even the 1,000 eyes of 500 Buddhas and Dharma masters can discern in him no specific quality. If hundreds of birds were now to strew flowers about his room, he could not but feel ashamed of himself. Whip, rope, ox, and man alike belong to emptiness. So vast and infinite the azure sky, that no concept of any sort can reach it. Over a blazing fire a snowflake cannot survive. When this state of mind is realized, comes at last comprehension of the spirit of the ancient masters. Returning to the source. From the very beginning there has not been so much as a speck of dust to mar the intrinsic purity. He observes the waxing and waning of life in the world while abiding unassertively in a state of unshakable serenity. This waxing and waning is no phantom or illusion, but a manifestation of the source. Why then is there need to strive for anything? The waters are blue, the mountains are green. Alone with himself, he observes things endlessly changing. He has returned to the origin, come back to the source, but his steps have been taken in vain. It is as though he were now blind and deaf. Seated in his hut, he hankers not for things outside. Streams meander on of themselves. Red flowers naturally bloom red. Entering the marketplace with helping hands. The gate of his cottage is closed and even the wisest cannot find him. His mental panorama has finally disappeared. He goes his own way, making no attempt to follow the steps of earlier sages. Carrying a gourd, he strolls into the market. Leaning on his staff, he returns home. He leads innkeepers and fishmongers in the way of the Buddha. Bare-chested, barefooted, he comes into the marketplace. Mudded and dust-covered, how broadly he grins. Without recourse to mystic powers. Withered trees he swiftly brings to bloom. Notes for Section 8. See this page. To take the analogy of form and emptiness, the salt corresponds to emptiness and the water to form. Until one has known the taste of Satori, one is ignorant of this emptiness and recognizes only the form. After enlightenment they are seen as no different from each other. Literally, wild strength. What is implied here is that at this stage delusive feelings still persist and that their eradication requires further training. Literally, riding upside down. That is, the Buddha mind, symbolized by the ox, is entirely sufficient unto itself. The implication of this passage is that Buddhas and Dharma ancestors have a mirror-like wisdom which can easily discern the character of the ordinary person, tainted as it is by various defilements. But those who had cleansed themselves of all impurities, including the subtlest forms of pride, would be so pure and natural that even a Buddha would be unable to look at them and say that they were this or that. This is an allusion to a parable centering around Niu Tou Fa Yung, a Zen master of the Tiang dynasty, who lived on Mount Niu Tou and who was widely extolled for the ardor with which he practiced Zazen in his mountain retreat. Even the birds, it is said, sang his praises by offering up flowers to him as he sat in his hut. After he became fully enlightened under the fourth patriarch. So the story goes, the birds ceased their floral offerings, because, having attained perfect enlightenment, he no longer gave off any aura, even of devotion and virtue. Azure sky stands for pure mind. With perfect enlightenment all delusive thoughts, including those of enlightenment or delusion, vanish. If, as the Sutras say, our essential nature is Bodhi, perfection, why did all Buddhas have to strive for enlightenment and perfection? Asked Dogen, who was able to resolve this paradox only after years of strenuous effort, culminating in his deep enlightenment. What is implied here is that the fully enlightened person, being no longer caught up in the objects of the senses, absorbs him or herself so unself-consciously in what is seen and heard that this seeing is no seeing and this hearing no hearing. Since with enlightenment comes the realization that one embraces the universe and all things in it, what is there to hanker for? Marketplace signifies the defiled world. The sense of this is that he has now become so purified, so perfected, that the wisest sage can detect about him no marks of perfection. That is, all concepts, opinions, assumptions, prejudices. In ancient China, gourds were commonly used as wine bottles. What is implied here therefore is that someone of the deepest spirituality is not averse to drinking with those fond of liquor in order to help them overcome their delusions. Here we see a fundamental difference in emphasis between the role of the spiritually accomplished individual in the Hinayana and in the Mahayana traditions. In the Hinayana, the highest spiritual type, the celibate monk, is set apart from the laity. Ideally he must be saint-like, a paragon of virtue, if he is to fulfill the role conceived for him by the community. Were it known that he indulged in alcohol, for instance, this would be regarded as the surest sign of a lingering impurity, a proof that his spirituality was not yet wholly refined. In Mahayana Buddhism, on the contrary, men and women of deep enlightenment give off no smell of enlightenment, no aura of saintliness. If they did, their spiritual attainment would be regarded as still deficient. Nor do they hold themselves aloof from the evils of the world. They do whatever is necessary to emancipate others from their follies, but without being sullied themselves. In this they are like the lotus, the symbol in Buddhism of purity and perfection, which grows in mud yet is undefiled by it. This is another way of saying that the fully enlightened man, because his whole personality is suffused with an inner radiance, brings light and hope to those in darkness and despair. Chapter. Postures.